At my own daughter's wedding, her fiancé looked me up and down and called me an embarrassment. In front of everyone, he mocked my suit and told security I didn't belong there. Guests laughed nervously, pretending not to hear. He thought he had all the power that night, but he had no idea who he was really dealing with. What happened next would change everything.
Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments section what time it is where you're watching this.
I stepped into the riverside estate and felt my breath catch. The ballroom stretched before me like something out of a fairy tale. 30-foot ceilings adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers that threw diamonds of light across marble floors. White roses climbed up gold-trimmed columns, and silk drapes the color of champagne billowed gently from the French windows overlooking the Chicago River. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the terrace, their notes floating through air perfumed with gardenias and money. This was the venue Sophia had circled in bridal magazines since she was 16. The one she'd whispered about during our Saturday morning pancake breakfasts, back when it was just the two of us against the world. I tugged at my suit jacket, the navy one from Kohl's clearance rack, $42 after the discount. Around me, guests glided past in Tom Ford and Armani, their watches worth more than my car. I caught my reflection in one of the gilt-edged mirrors and saw what they saw. A working-class father in a working-class suit, out of place among the tech executives and venture capitalists Brandon had invited. But then I saw her. Sophia stood at the center of the room in her wedding gown, radiant and laughing, and suddenly none of it mattered. My little girl. I remembered her at 7, missing her 2 front teeth, telling me she'd marry a prince someday. I remembered working double shifts so she could take piano lessons. Remembered her college graduation, watching her walk across that stage with honors while I stood in the back, too proud to breathe. She caught my eye and waved, her smile warm and genuine. For a moment, everything felt right. I made my way toward her, weaving through clusters of guests discussing stock options and Series B funding. A waiter offered me champagne from a silver tray, Dom Perignon if the label was accurate. I took a glass, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue. Fine champagne in a fine venue. Funny how life works. I'd walked through these same doors 18 months ago, when this place was empty and echoing, tagged for foreclosure. The Riverside Estate, once the crown jewel of Chicago's event venues, brought low by mismanagement and debt. I remembered standing in this exact spot, imagining what it could be again, imagining Sophia's wedding day. The real estate agent was skeptical. She needs $2 million in renovations minimum. The previous owner is desperate to sell, but she trailed off, eyeing my modest car in the parking lot. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd signed papers that week, papers that transferred ownership through a quiet LLC. Papers my attorney filed in a courthouse basement where no one would think to look. Papers that would matter today, though I didn't know exactly how much. I'd bought this ballroom for my daughter's future. I just hadn't expected her future husband to treat me like the help. "Excuse me, are you with the bride or groom?" A woman in a silver gown looked at me with polite confusion, the kind reserved for people who don't quite belong. "Bride," I said simply. "I'm Sophia's father." Her expression shifted. Surprise, then poorly concealed pity. Before she could respond, I heard a voice cut through the classical music and champagne chatter. "Eric, we need to talk." Brandon stood before me, tall and sharp in his custom tuxedo, his jaw set in a way that made my stomach tighten. This was about to get interesting.
Brandon didn't lower his voice. He wanted an audience. "Eric, we need to have a conversation about optics." He gestured vaguely at my suit, his lip curling just enough to convey distaste. Around us, conversations died, heads turned. The string quartet played on, oblivious. Optics? I kept my voice steady. Look, I get it. You did your best. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. But this is a high-profile event. I have board members here, investors, people who matter. He paused, letting that last word hang. And you're walking around in, what is that, JCPenney? Kohl's? Heat crept up my neck. It's a suit, Brandon. A clean one. It's embarrassing. He stepped closer, his cologne expensive and overwhelming. Do you have any idea what this wedding cost? What I invested to make Sophia's dreams come true? $300,000. That's more than you probably make in 5 years. A woman in pearls nearby gasped softly. Others pretended to study their drinks, their discomfort palpable. I caught the eye of Brandon's best man, a guy named Trevor I'd met at the rehearsal dinner. He looked away quickly. I'm her father, I said, quietly. Exactly, her father. Not the groom, not the host, not the person who paid for any of this. Brandon's voice grew louder, more confident. He was performing now, establishing dominance. I think what's best for everyone, especially Sophia, is if you maybe stepped outside for a bit, enjoyed the terrace, away from the main event. You want me to leave my daughter's wedding? I want you to stop making people uncomfortable. He glanced at my shoes, scuffed black loafers I'd polished that morning. Look at yourself, man. You're a nice guy, I'm sure, but you don't fit here. This isn't a backyard barbecue. This is the Riverside Estate. This is elegance, class, standards. My jaw tightened. I'd sat through depositions with hostile witnesses, endured cross-examinations designed to break me. But this, being dismissed by a 29-year-old tech bro in front of 50 strangers, hit differently. I love my daughter, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. Brandon's expression hardened. Wrong answer. He snapped his fingers, actually snapped them, like I was a waiter who'd brought the wrong wine. 2 security guards in black suits materialized from the edges of the ballroom. Young guys, probably hired through some agency, doing their job. Gentlemen, he said smoothly, this guest needs to be escorted out. He's becoming disruptive. Disruptive? The word came out sharper than I intended. I haven't said a word to anyone but you. Your presence is disruptive. He turned to the guards. Please remove him, now. One guard reached for my elbow. I saw Sophia across the room, her face stricken, starting towards us. Brandon's mother intercepted her with a manicured hand and urgent whisper. The guests formed a silent jury, their eyes averted, judgment delivered through cowardice. It's fine, I told the guard, gently pulling my arm free. Because here's what I knew that Brandon didn't. I'd learned patience in courtrooms over 23 years, learned when to fight and when to let arrogance hang itself. As they escorted me toward the French doors, Brandon called after me, loud enough for everyone to hear. Nothing personal, Eric, just business. You understand? I understood perfectly. And soon, so would he. The security guards flanked me like I was a criminal. Their grips weren't rough, but they were firm, a message to everyone watching that I was being removed, not leaving by choice. As we moved toward the French doors, I caught Sophia's face through the crowd. Her eyes glistened with tears, her bouquet trembling in her hands. She pushed past a cluster of guests, her wedding gown rustling urgently. Dad, wait, stop! But Brandon's mother moved past her. Patricia Westfield. I'd met her twice before, once at the engagement party, once at the rehearsal dinner. Both times she'd looked at me like I was something tracked in on someone's shoe.
Now she intercepted Sophia with the precision of a woman who'd spent her life managing optics and damage control. "Darling, don't make a scene," Patricia whispered, loud enough for me to hear. Her diamonds caught the chandelier light as she gripped Sophia's arm. "It's your wedding day. Your guests are watching. You can't let your father's situation ruin this moment." "His situation? Mom, Patricia, they're throwing him out." "Brandon is handling it." Patricia's smile was ice wrapped in Chanel. "Your father will be fine. He can wait outside until after the first dance. It's better this way. Trust me. For everyone." I saw the war on Sophia's face. The little girl who used to hold my hand crossing streets, battling against the woman who wanted to please her new family, who wanted to believe this was somehow reasonable. "Sophia, it's okay," I called to her, keeping my voice gentle. "Go enjoy your day. We'll talk later." The lie tasted bitter, but I said it anyway, because that's what fathers do. We absorb the pain so our children don't have to. Her mouth opened, closed, a tear slipped down her cheek, and immediately Patricia produced a handkerchief, dabbing at Sophia's makeup with practiced efficiency. "There now, don't cry, you'll ruin your foundation." Patricia steered her back toward the center of the ballroom, toward Brandon, who watched us with satisfied eyes. "Everything's perfect. Just perfect." The security guards guided me through the French doors and onto the terrace. October wind bit through my thin suit jacket, but I welcomed the cold. It sharpened my focus. Behind me, through the glass, the wedding continued. The quartet launched into something bright and celebratory. Guests resumed their conversations, the disruption already forgotten. Brandon kissed Sophia's temple, whispering something that made her nod reluctantly. I stood alone on the stone terrace, overlooking the Chicago River, watching the sun paint the water gold. 23 years as a circuit court judge taught me something crucial. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful one. I pulled out my phone. One text message. That's all it would take. But not yet. Let them have their perfect moment. Let Brandon believe he'd won. Because the best justice is the kind nobody sees coming.
The October wind sliced through my jacket, but I barely felt it. I'd stood in colder places, both literally and figuratively. I leaned against the stone balustrade, watching the Chicago River flow dark and steady below. The terrace was empty except for me and the potted topiaries Brandon's wedding planner had arranged. Through the French doors behind me, music and laughter drifted out like mockery. Funny how quickly a room could turn on you. One moment you're a guest, the next you're a problem to be solved. But I'd seen this before. Different settings, same dynamic. The confident defendant who thinks the courtroom belongs to him. The attorney who underestimates opposing counsel because of a cheap briefcase. The expert witness who believes credentials trump preparation. They all learn the same lesson eventually. Power isn't about who talks the loudest. 23 years had taught me patience. I'd sat through trials where I wanted to bang my gavel and demand order, but knew silence carried more weight. I'd watched guilty men walk free on technicalities, then get caught later because they couldn't resist bragging. I'd seen million-dollar contracts dissolve over documents people forgot to read. The trick was never showing your hand too early. I pulled my phone from my pocket, its screen glowing in the twilight. One name in my contacts, Margaret Chen, my estate attorney, the woman who'd structured everything, the LLC, the trust agreements, the carefully worded conditions Brandon's lawyers had apparently skimmed right over. My thumb hovered over her name. Not yet. Inside, through the glass, I watched Brandon take Sophia's hand for their first dance. She looked beautiful under the chandelier light, but her smile seemed strained. Brandon twirled her with practiced precision, performing for his investors and board members. I remembered Sophia at 4, standing on my shoes while we danced to oldies in our cramped living room. "Higher, Daddy! Spin me higher!" she had shrieked with laughter, fearless because she trusted I'd never let her fall. That little girl was in there somewhere, underneath the designer gown and the forced composure. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the river, cold water and concrete, the smell of Chicago itself. This city had made me, raised me, tested me in ways Brandon's Silicon Valley bubble never could. He thought he knew struggle because his startup had a rough Series A round. He had no idea. I signed the papers on this building in a snowstorm, standing in an empty foreclosure office with a cashier's check that represented 15 years of careful investments. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every modest choice that made people like Patricia Westfield look at me with pity. All leading to this moment. Brandon wanted to play power games in my house. Fine, let's play.
I turned my back to the ballroom and looked out at the city skyline, letting myself remember. 18 months ago, I'd stood in this exact spot, though the terrace had been covered in dead leaves and bird droppings then. The riverside estate was a ghost of its former glory. Windows boarded up, chandeliers wrapped in plastic, the marble floors cracked and neglected. The bank had listed it as a commercial foreclosure. Asking price, $1.8 million, as is. "It's a money pit," the real estate agent had warned, her heels clicking on broken tile. The previous owner ran it into the ground. Lawsuits, liens, the whole mess. Nobody wants to touch it. But I saw something else. I saw the bones of elegance beneath the decay, the soaring ceilings, the river view, the ballroom where Chicago's elite had once celebrated life's milestones. And I saw Sophia, 16 years old, sprawled on our living room couch with bridal magazines spread around her like confetti. "Dad, look at this one. The Riverside Estate. Isn't it perfect?" She'd held up a glossy photo, this very ballroom, years before its fall. "That's where I want to get married someday." "It's beautiful, honey." "Do you think, would we ever be able to afford something like that?" I'd looked at her hopeful face and made a decision right then. Maybe not for the wedding itself, but somehow, some way, I'd make sure she had what she dreamed of. So when the foreclosure notice crossed my desk, judges see every property dispute in their jurisdiction, I didn't hesitate. I called Margaret Chen, an attorney I'd known for years, someone who understood discretion. "I want to buy it," I told her, quietly. "Eric, that's nearly $2 million. I have it. 15 years of investment returns, municipal bonds, a frugal life that people like Patricia Westfield mistook for poverty. Set up an LLC, something anonymous, Harbor Point Holdings maybe. Make sure nobody can trace it back to me. Why the secrecy? Because it's not about credit. It's about giving my daughter a future she doesn't have to feel guilty about." Margaret had done her job perfectly. The LLC purchased the property, hired contractors, slowly brought it back to life. I'd overseen every detail. The chandelier restoration, the marble refinishing, the sound system, the commercial kitchen. Turned it into a premier wedding venue again. Within a year, it was booking events at premium rates. By the time Brandon proposed to Sophia, the Riverside Estate was the hottest venue in Chicago, booked solid for 18 months, except I'd made sure to keep one weekend open, the first weekend in October, for Sophia. When Brandon had announced he'd secured the venue, I'd said nothing. When he bragged about the cost, $300,000 for the venue alone, Eric. That's what it takes to give Sophia the best. I'd simply nodded. He'd paid his fee to Harbor Point Holdings, LLC, transferred via his attorney to Margaret's office, never once asking who owned the company, never once doing the basic due diligence any decent lawyer would recommend. He'd written a check to rent my property, to celebrate in my building, to throw me out of my own investment. The irony was almost poetic. I looked down at my phone again. Margaret would be waiting for my signal. One text, and the truth would come crashing through Brandon's perfect celebration like a wrecking ball. But I'd learned something in those 23 years on the bench. Timing is everything. The question wasn't whether to act, it was when. Through the French doors, I watched Brandon raise his champagne glass. The guests gathered around him in a semicircle, his venture capital friends, tech executives in designer suits, Patricia beaming with maternal pride. The string quartet fell silent. Someone tapped a knife against crystal, and the ballroom hushed. Brandon stood at the center of it all, one arm draped possessively around Sophia's waist. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, for sharing this incredible moment with us at this spectacular venue. He gestured grandly at the chandeliers, the marble columns, the silk drapes. My chandeliers, my marble, my silk. When I proposed to Sophia, I made her a promise. I promised her the wedding of her dreams. No compromises, no cutting corners, nothing but the absolute best. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Sophia smiled, but I could see the tightness around her eyes. The Riverside estate doesn't come cheap, folks. Brandon's grin widened. But when you love someone, when you want to give them everything they deserve, cost becomes irrelevant. That's what separates. He paused, took a sip of champagne. That's what separates people who talk about dreams from people who make them happen. Trevor, the best man, laughed a little too loudly. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, as if her son had just recited Shakespeare. Some people can't understand that level of commitment. Brandon's tone shifted, became pointed. Some people think love is about, I don't know, showing up in a cheap suit and expecting applause for the bare minimum. A few uncomfortable glances. Someone coughed. But real love, Brandon squeezed Sophia's waist, real love is about sacrifice, investment, putting your money where your mouth is. I spent $300,000 to make tonight perfect because Sophia deserves a man who can provide, who can build a future, not someone stuck in the past. He raised his glass higher. So here's to new beginnings, to leaving behind mediocrity, to standards, to excellence, to us. To us, the crowd echoed, crystal clinking. I stood alone on the terrace, the October wind biting through my $42 suit, watching a man toast himself for renting my building. The audacity was almost impressive. Brandon drained his glass, kissed Sophia's cheek, and accepted congratulations from the circling investors. He looked so certain, so secure in his triumph. He had no idea he was celebrating on borrowed ground. Literally. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages to Margaret Chen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. One text. That's all it would take to shatter his perfect night. But not yet. Let him have his moment. Let him believe he'd won. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall. I typed 2 words. It's time. My thumb hesitated over the send button for only a moment. Then I pressed it. The message delivered instantly. 3 gray dots appeared as Margaret typed her response. Confirmed, Monday morning, 9 a.m. His attorneys will receive the full disclosure package. Are you certain?
I looked through the glass at Brandon, still basking in applause, still believing himself untouchable. "Absolutely certain," I typed back. Margaret's response was immediate. "Understood. The trust documents are ready. Sophia's protections are ironclad. He won't know what hit him." I pocketed my phone and let myself remember the conversation that had started all of this. 6 months ago, in Margaret's office overlooking Michigan Avenue. "Eric, you need to think about asset protection," she'd said, spreading documents across her mahogany desk. "Sophia's getting married. You've built substantial wealth. The estate holdings, your retirement accounts, the investment portfolio. If this marriage goes south, you need safeguards. You don't like Brandon." "I don't trust Brandon." She'd pulled up his financial records, public information for someone who knew where to look. "His startup is leveraged to the ceiling. 3 rounds of funding, minimal profitability. He's living on venture capital fumes and his mother's trust fund. Sophia loves him, which is why you need to protect her from herself." Margaret had slid a document toward me. "Prenup would be ideal, but I'm guessing he'd never sign one." I'd shaken my head. Brandon had made his position clear. "Prenups are for people who don't believe in love, Eric. I'm insulted you'd even suggest it." "Then we use the trust structure." Margaret had pulled out a legal pad, sketching the framework. "You've already established the estate trust for Sophia's benefit. We add protective clauses, conditions that shield her inheritance from marital property claims, such as the trust only distributes if both spouses demonstrate financial responsibility, prenuptial counseling completion, and, this is the key, the trustee has full discretion to withhold funds if the marriage shows signs of financial exploitation or emotional abuse." I leaned forward. "Who's the trustee?" "You are." Margaret's smile had been sharp. "And I'm the backup, if you prefer to remain anonymous. The beauty is that Brandon won't even know these trusts exist until he tries to access them. Most men in his position assume they've married into money. They make plans, big plans. And when he discovers he hasn't, that depends on how he reacts. If he's genuinely in love with Sophia, the money won't matter. But if he's been counting on her father's wealth to bail out his failing startup, well, then you'll know exactly who you're dealing with." We'd signed the documents that afternoon. Protective clauses buried in legal language Brandon's attorneys had apparently never bothered to review. Conditions that would activate Monday morning when Margaret filed the disclosure with the probate court. Brandon thought he'd married access to my assets. Instead, he'd married my daughter, and only my daughter. The trust was untouchable, the estate was mine, the inheritance was conditional. And after tonight's performance, those conditions were about to become very, very relevant. Inside, Brandon laughed at someone's joke, his hand still possessive on Sophia's waist. "Enjoy the champagne," I thought. "Enjoy the venue you think you paid for, because Monday morning your lawyers are going to have some very interesting news. And by Monday afternoon, we'll see what kind of man you really are."
I couldn't hear their conversation through the glass, but I could read my daughter's body language. I'd been reading it for 27 years. Sophia had pulled Brandon aside, near the champagne fountain, away from the celebrating guests. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw set in that way she'd inherited from me, the look that meant she was holding back tears through sheer willpower. Brandon smiled and tried to pull her into an embrace. She stepped back. Good girl, I thought. Her hands moved, gesturing toward the terrace doors, toward where I stood in the cold. Brandon's smile faltered.
He glanced around, checking if anyone was watching, then leaned close to speak directly into her ear. Sophia shook her head. Her mouth formed words I couldn't hear, but could imagine. "That's my father. You threw him out." Brandon's expression shifted. First surprise that she dare question him, then calculation. He touched her face with practiced tenderness, the gesture of a man who'd learned that physical affection could derail difficult conversations. She pushed his hand away. Patricia materialized beside them, champagne glass in hand, her smile brittle and bright. She said something to Sophia, gestured elegantly at the gathered guests. The subtext was clear, even from 50 feet away. Don't make a scene. Not here, not now. But Sophia wasn't backing down. I saw her spine straighten, that same stubborn posture she'd had at 8 years old when she'd refused to apologize to a bully who deserved her defiance. Brandon's face darkened. His mouth moved rapidly, and even without audio, I recognized the cadence. Justification, rationalization, blame shifting. I'd seen it 1,000 times in my courtroom. Guilty men always talk faster when cornered. Sophia's hand went to her throat, a self-soothing gesture she'd had since childhood. She was wavering. Brandon seized the moment. He pulled her close again, this time more forcefully, speaking urgently. His hand cupped the back of her head, keeping her face turned away from the terrace, away from me, controlling her line of sight. Classic manipulation. Patricia nodded approvingly, adding her own commentary. A united front, 2 against 1. I watched my daughter's resistance crumble in real time. Her shoulders sagged, her head dropped. Brandon kissed her forehead, a gesture that looked loving to the casual observer, but felt like victory to me. He'd won this round. Trevor approached with fresh champagne, breaking whatever spell had held them. Brandon immediately transformed, his expression warm and jovial, his arm back around Sophia's waist in that possessive way he had. To everyone watching, they were the perfect couple having a private moment. Only I could see the defeat in Sophia's eyes. Patricia raised her glass in a toast, and the 3 of them drank together. A family unit, sealed and complete, with me erased from the picture. But here's what Brandon didn't understand. You can gaslight a woman about her feelings. You can manipulate her into doubting her own judgment. You can even convince her that loyalty to her father is somehow a betrayal of her marriage. But you can't gaslight legal documents. You can't manipulate property deeds. You can't charm your way out of trust conditions you never knew existed. Monday morning was coming. And unlike Sophia, the law doesn't waver when you smile at it. I was still watching through the glass when the terrace door opened behind me. Eric. I turned to find Judge Thomas Brennan, wrapped in an overcoat, holding 2 glasses of bourbon. Tom and I had sat on the bench together for 17 years, him in criminal court, me in civil court. We'd shared countless lunches at the courthouse cafeteria, argued legal theory over bad coffee, attended each other's retirement parties and promotions. "Thought you might need this." He handed me a glass. Johnny Walker Blue. I liberated it from the premium bar before anyone noticed. I accepted it gratefully. "You saw what happened." Everyone saw what happened. Tom leaned against the balustrade beside me, his breath fogging in the October air. "That arrogant son of a—" He stopped himself, took a sip. I wanted to say something. Karen had to physically restrain me. "I appreciate the restraint." "Do you?" His eyes were sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Because I know you, Eric. I know that look. You're planning something." I said nothing, just sipped the bourbon. It burned smooth and expensive. "The venue," Tom said quietly. "Harbor Point Holdings. That's you, isn't it?"
I glanced at him. He smiled. I reviewed the property transfer case 18 months ago, Riverside Estate foreclosure. The LLC paperwork crossed my desk for approval. I recognized Margaret Chen's signature. And Margaret only handles one type of client, the discreet, wealthy kind. He raised his glass in a subtle salute. You bought your daughter's dream venue. I bought an investment property. Sure you did. And that trust you established for Sophia, the one with more conditions than a military clearance, that's just prudent estate planning, right? We stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration through the glass. Inside, Brandon was demonstrating something with his hands, probably explaining his startup's revolutionary blockchain AI synergy platform to bored investors. He has no idea, does he, about who you are, what you've built. He knows I'm Sophia's father. He thinks you're nobody. Tom's voice hardened. I watched him in there, Eric, the way he dismissed you, the casual cruelty. I've seen men like him in my courtroom, entitled, arrogant, convinced the rules don't apply to them. And how do those cases usually end? Badly, for them. Tom finished his bourbon. When do the papers get served? Monday morning. His attorneys will receive the trust disclosure, along with documentation proving I own this building. Tom whistled low. That's going to be quite the wake-up call. It's going to be educational. Judge Novak is in there, by the way, and Judge Martinez. Judge Wilson sent his regrets but asked me to tell you, Tom paused, choosing his words carefully, that the entire Cook County judiciary is watching this situation with interest. My eyebrows rose. You told them. Didn't have to. You invited half the circuit court to your daughter's wedding, Eric. We all know who you are, and we all saw what happened tonight. His expression turned grim. Brandon Westfield just humiliated a sitting circuit court judge at his own daughter's wedding in a building that judge owns in front of witnesses who spend their lives adjudicating consequences. It's not about revenge, Tom. No, he agreed. It's about justice, which coincidentally is your specialty. He clapped my shoulder. They'll know soon enough, Judge. The boy wonder in there is about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions. Tom headed back inside, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, Eric, you're handling this with remarkable restraint. I'd already had his startup audited for tax fraud. The door closed behind me, leaving me alone with my bourbon and my thoughts. Brandon Westfield had just declared war on a man he thought was powerless. He'd miscalculated badly, and Monday morning, the scoreboard would reflect that.
From my position on the terrace, I watched the first crack appear. Brandon stood near the bar, gesturing animatedly to a group of investors, when Judge Brennan passed by with his wife Karen. Tom said something in passing, brief, polite, but whatever it was, made one of the investors do a double-take. The man, silver-haired, expensive watch, turned to stare at the terrace doors, at me. Brandon noticed. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. The investor leaned toward Brandon, said something quietly. Brandon's response was immediate. A dismissive laugh, a wave of his hand. But I could see the confusion in his eyes, the first seed of doubt. Another guest joined their circle, Judge Martinez, his wife on his arm. More polite conversation, more subtle glances toward the terrace. Brandon's jaw tightened. I sipped my bourbon and waited. It started slowly, a whisper campaign Brandon couldn't quite catch. Guests conferring in low voices, meaningful looks exchanged across champagne glasses. The venture capitalist who'd been laughing at Brandon's jokes earlier now stood with Judge Novak, their conversations serious and hushed. Patricia noticed it too. I watched her glide from group to group,
damage control and diamonds and Chanel, trying to redirect conversations back to the wedding festivities. But the murmur had already begun. Brandon pulled Trevor aside. Even from outside, I could read the tension in his posture. His best man shrugged helplessly, clearly as confused as Brandon about the shifting atmosphere. Then it happened. One of the investors, a man named Richard Caldwell, who'd made his fortune in real estate, broke away from his group and approached Brandon directly. Their conversation was brief but intense. Caldwell gestured toward the terrace, said something that made Brandon's face go pale. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew Richard Caldwell. We'd sat across from each other during a zoning dispute 3 years ago. His company had tried to evade building codes. I'd ruled against him. He'd respected the decision, even cited it in later business dealings as the day I learned to follow the rules. Richard knew exactly who I was. And apparently, he'd just shared that information with Brandon. Brandon's head snapped toward the terrace doors. Our eyes met through the glass, his wide with dawning realization, mine steady and calm. He said something sharp to Richard, shook his head violently. Denial. Richard shrugged, pulled out his phone, showed Brandon something on the screen. Probably my judicial profile. Maybe a news article from one of my higher-profile cases. Brandon's face cycled through emotions: disbelief, anger, fear, calculation. Then he made his move. He strode toward the security guards stationed near the entrance, the same two who had escorted me out earlier. His gestures were aggressive, pointing at the terrace, at me, his mouth moving rapidly. The guards looked uncertain. One of them glanced at the other guests, clearly picking up on the strange energy in the room. Brandon pulled out his phone, made a call. His expression turned triumphant as he spoke to whoever answered. 2 minutes later, 3 additional security personnel entered through the main doors. Brandon pointed at the terrace, his instructions clear. I watched him command his small army, and I almost felt pity. He thought he was fortifying his position. He didn't realize he was digging his hole deeper. The head of security approached the terrace doors. Through the glass, he made eye contact with me, then held up one finger. Wait. He walked back to Brandon, said something, gestured at the gathering judges and their spouses. Brandon's face flushed red. He pulled the security chief aside, and I could see the argument unfold. Money was mentioned. I saw Brandon pull out his wallet. The universal language of entitled desperation. Whatever amount he offered, it worked. The security team moved toward the terrace doors. This was about to get very interesting.
The terrace doors swung open, and I walked back inside. Not because Brandon wanted me there, not because security was escorting me, but because it was time. The security chief, a broad-shouldered man named Davis according to his nameplate, stepped aside as I entered. His hand had been reaching for my arm, but something in my expression made him reconsider. Behind him, his team exchanged uncertain glances. Brandon stood 15 feet away, his face a mask of forced confidence, waiting for his hired muscle to do their job. They didn't move. "Is there a problem?" I asked Davis calmly. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I've been asked to... that is, Mr. Westfield has requested..." "I know what Mr. Westfield requested. I'm asking if you personally have a problem with me being here." Davis looked past me, through the terrace doors at the Chicago skyline. "Sir, I need to clarify something. Who exactly owns this venue?" The ballroom had gone quiet. Not silent, the string quartet still played, but conversation had dropped to whispers. Every eye in the room was on us. "Harbor Point Holdings, LLC," I said clearly. "The deed is registered with Cook County, public record." "And who owns Harbor Point Holdings?" I met his eyes. "I do." The whisper that went through the crowd was like wind through trees. Brandon lurched forward. "That's a lie. I paid for this venue. I have the contract." You have a rental agreement, I corrected gently, with my company, which I appreciate, by the way. Your check cleared on Tuesday. His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Davis's posture changed, subtle but significant. He turned to Brandon. Sir, if this gentleman owns the property, I can't legally remove him. That would be complicated. I don't care if it's complicated, Brandon's voice cracked. I paid you. You paid for security services, not for illegal eviction of a property owner. Judge Brennan appeared at my elbow, Karen beside him. Then Judge Martinez with his wife. Judge Novak joined from the other side. They formed a casual semicircle around me. Not aggressive, not protective, just present. Richard Caldwin stepped forward from the investor group. Brandon, I tried to tell you. This is Judge Eric Whitman, Circuit Court Northern District of Illinois, 23 years on the bench. Judge? Trevor, the best man, looked between us. Wait, you're a judge? Circuit Court, Judge Martinez confirmed. Eric's handled some of the most significant civil cases in Illinois. The lakefront development dispute, the pension fund restructuring. That was him. Another wave of whispers. Phones came out. Guests were Googling. Verification happening in real time. Patricia's face had gone the color of her pearls. She grabbed Brandon's arm, hissing something urgent, but he shook her off. This is insane, Brandon said, but his voice had lost its conviction. You showed up in a cheap suit. You work some nobody job. I'm a public servant. I don't need expensive suits. The law doesn't care what I'm wearing. Sophia pushed through the crowd, her wedding dress rustling. She stopped when she saw me, surrounded by judges, standing in the ballroom like I belonged there. Because I did belong there. I owned it. Dad? Her voice was small, confused. What's happening? Your husband tried to throw me out of my own building, sweetheart. Twice. Brandon's face had gone from pale to red. Your building? He wheeled on Richard Caldwin. You said he was a judge, not... Judges in Illinois don't make Silicon Valley money, but they make decent money, and some of them are very, very good with investments. He nodded toward me. Eric bought this place in foreclosure 18 months ago, paid cash through an LLC. I looked it up while you were yelling at security. The investors were watching Brandon now with a different kind of interest, the kind that came before capital flight. Brandon's startup was built on investor confidence, and that confidence was evaporating in real time. So, I said into the silence, shall we continue the celebration? It is, after all, my daughter's wedding day. I walked past Brandon towards Sophia. The crowd parted like water. Behind me, I heard Davis quietly dismiss his security team, and I heard Brandon's world begin to crumble. The ballroom felt like a courtroom. I'd spent 23 years in that atmosphere, and I recognized it instantly. The weight of judgment, the anticipation of verdict, the silence before truth detonates. Brandon found his voice first. This is ridiculous. You're trying to ruin my wedding with some elaborate story. It's not a story. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and turned the screen toward the crowd. This is the property deed, filed with Cook County on March 15th last year. Harbor Point Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, Margaret Chen. Principal owner, I scrolled down, Eric James Whiteman. Judge Novak stepped closer, adjusted his glasses, examined my screen. That's legitimate. I can see the county seal. Anyone can fake, Brandon started. I can pull up the county database right now, Richard Caldwell said, already typing on his phone. It's public record. He waited, scrolled, then looked up. He's telling the truth. Harbor Point Holdings purchased the Riverside estate for $1.8 million. Cash sale, no mortgage. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Patricia gripped Brandon's arm. What does this mean? It means, I said quietly, that the venue your son claimed he, quote, secured for $300,000 was actually a rental fee paid to my company, which, I should mention, includes a detailed contract he apparently didn't read thoroughly. Trevor, the best man, muttered something under his breath. Several investors had their phones out now, fact-checking in real time. Brandon's face cycled through expressions: denial, rage, calculation. He landed on indignation. "So what? You own a building. That doesn't make you... You're still just..." He gestured at my suit. "Look at yourself. You dress like you shop at thrift stores." "I do shop at thrift stores," I said calmly, "because I don't need to prove my worth with designer labels. I spent my money on investments, on my daughter's education, on building something that would last." I paused. "You spent yours on impressing strangers." One of the investors, a woman in an emerald gown, whispered to her companion. They both looked at Brandon with reassessment in their eyes. "Brandon," Sophia's voice cut through the tension, "is what he's saying true? Did you know my dad owned this place?" "Of course I didn't know. How could I—" He rounded on me. "You hid this. You deliberately deceived us." "I purchased property through a legal entity," I corrected. "That's not deception. That's privacy. What is deceptive is throwing your father-in-law out of his own building while bragging about how much you paid to rent it." Judge Martinez spoke up. "Eric, when did you purchase the estate?" 18 months ago. It was in foreclosure, abandoned. I saw potential." I looked at Sophia. "Remembered you circling this place in magazines when you were 16, honey? Talking about how someday, maybe if you were lucky?" Her hand flew to her mouth. "I bought it for you," I said simply. "Renovated it. Turned it back into what it was meant to be. I kept one weekend open every year, the first weekend of October, your favorite time of year, just in case." Tears spilled down her cheeks, smudging her makeup. Brandon grabbed her hand. "Sophia, don't fall for this manipulation. He's trying to make you feel guilty, trying to come between us." "He bought me a wedding venue, an entire building. And I paid for everything else," Brandon's voice rose, desperate. "The flowers, the catering, the dress, everything. What does he contribute besides showing up in a bargain basement suit and embarrassing you?" The slap of reality was almost audible. Judge Brennan stepped forward. "Mr. Westfield, I'm going to give you some free legal advice. Stop talking." "Why? Because you're all judges? You're all on his side? This is corruption. This is you digging yourself deeper," Tom said flatly. "Every word out of your mouth right now is being witnessed by half the circuit court judiciary and recorded on a dozen phones. If I were your attorney, I'd be physically restraining you." Patricia tried. "Brandon, please, let's just—" "No!" He shook her off. "I'm not going to stand here and be humiliated by some mid-level bureaucrat who thinks owning one building makes him special." The silence that followed was profound. Judge Martinez exhaled slowly. "Mid-level bureaucrat." "Son," Richard Caldwell said quietly, "Judge Whiteman presided over the lakefront development case. He ruled on pension reforms affecting 3 million Illinois residents. He's been shortlisted twice for appellate court appointments. Mid-level doesn't begin to—" "I don't care." Brandon's composure shattered completely. "None of this changes the fact that I'm the one who provided for Sophia. I'm the one with the successful company, the investors, the future. What does he have? A government salary and a cheap suit." I let the moment breathe, let his words hang in the air like evidence. Then I spoke, my voice carrying the same tone I used when delivering verdicts. "I have integrity, Brandon. I have my daughter's respect, or I did until you tried to erase me from her life. I have the wisdom to know that wealth isn't about flash, it's about foundation. And I have something you'll never possess, no matter how much venture capital you raise." "What's that?" "Humility." The word landed like a gavel strike. Sophia pulled her hand from Brandon's grip. She looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw recognition dawn, not of who I was, but of who he was. "You tried to throw my father out," she said slowly. "You mocked his suit? You called security? You humiliated him in front of everyone." Her voice strengthened. "And all this time, he owned the building. He bought this place for me, and you tried to erase him from my wedding day." "Sophia, I was protecting you from what?
From my father's love? What kind of man does that?"
Brandon reached for her. She moved away. The investors were already leaving, making quiet exits with apologetic nods. The capital flight had begun. Patricia stood frozen, her carefully constructed image of her perfect son dissolving in real time. And I stood there in my $42 suit, surrounded by colleagues and friends, watching Brandon finally understand what he'd done. He hadn't just insulted a father. He'd declared war on a judge, in that judge's own property, in front of witnesses who understood exactly what justice looked like. "I think," I said quietly, "it's time for you and me to have a private conversation, Brandon, about trust conditions and Monday morning meetings with attorneys and what happens when you underestimate the man whose daughter you married." His face went pale. "But first," I turned to Sophia, "may I have this dance, sweetheart? I believe fathers and daughters traditionally get one." Through her tears, she nodded. And as I led my daughter to the dance floor, my ballroom, my investment, my gift, I heard Brandon's world finish crumbling behind us.
The string quartet shifted to something slower, softer. Sophia's hand trembled in mine as we took our positions on the dance floor. The same floor I'd watched being refinished tile by tile 18 months ago. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Her voice broke. "I didn't know about any of it." "I know you didn't, sweetheart. I guided her through the steps the way I had when she was 4 years old, standing on my shoes. That's not your fault. But I should have defended you. When he called security, I should have—" "You were torn between two people you love. That's not weakness. That's being human." Around us, guests kept their distance, giving us space. But I could feel their eyes, their phones, their judgment shifting like tides. Brandon stood near the bar, Patricia beside him, both of them frozen in the wreckage of their certainty. "I don't understand," Sophia whispered. "Why didn't you tell me? About the venue? About being a judge? About everything? Because none of it mattered until it did." I met her eyes. "I didn't want you to love me because of what I owned or what title I held. I wanted you to love me because I'm your father, because I showed up, because I've always been there." "In a Kohl's suit," she said, and despite everything, a small smile touched her lips. "In a Kohl's suit," I confirmed, "because that suit doesn't define me. And your husband's Armani tuxedo doesn't define him. His character does. And tonight, Sophia, he showed you exactly who he is." Her smile faded. She glanced over my shoulder toward Brandon, then back to me. "What happens now?" "That's your decision, not mine. I can tell you what I know as a judge who's seen 1,000 cases like this. Men who value appearance over substance. Men who see their wives as accessories to their success, rather than partners in their lives. Men who throw away family because family isn't impressive enough for their investors." "You think he married me for the wrong reasons?" "I think he married you for Brandon's reasons. Whether those reasons include actually loving you, the real you, not the idea of you, that's something only you can determine." The song was ending. Our dance was almost over. "I bought this venue for your future, Sophia. Not for your wedding specifically, for your future. Whatever that looks like, whoever you choose to share it with." I squeezed her hand gently. "But I need you to know something. The trust I established for you has conditions, protections. Because a father's job isn't just to give his daughter everything she wants, it's to protect her from people who would take everything she has." "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that activate when a spouse demonstrates financial exploitation or emotional abuse. The kind that ensure your inheritance stays yours, not absorbed into a failing startup or used to bail out bad business decisions." I paused. "The kind that go into effect Monday morning,
when Brandon's attorneys receive the full disclosure. Her breath caught. He doesn't know, does he? About the trust conditions? He's about to. Behind us, I heard raised voices. Trevor was escorting Brandon toward the exit, Patricia following with her purse clutched like a shield. Several investors had already left. The ones remaining were conferring in tight clusters, damage control in real time. Judge Whitman, Richard Caldwell approached as the music ended. I wanted to apologize. Several of us had committed to Brandon's Series C funding round. That's no longer happening. We're withdrawing our letters of intent. Sophia's hand tightened on mine. That's your business decision, I said carefully. It's the right business decision. A man who would treat his father-in-law that way, that speaks to character. And character determines how someone handles pressure, failure, adversity. He looked at Sophia. I'm sorry this happened at your wedding, ma'am, but better to learn now than 5 years and 2 kids later. He walked away, leaving us in the truth of his words. Dad? Sophia's voice was small. What do I do? You already know what to do, sweetheart. You've always been smarter than you gave yourself credit for. Stronger, too. I pulled her into a hug. I'll be here, whatever you decide. Cheap suit and all. She laughed through her tears, holding me tight. I love you, Dad. Thank you for everything. For this venue, for protecting me, for showing up even when he tried to throw me out. Always, I promised. That's what fathers do. 3 days later, Margaret Chen called with an update. Brandon's attorneys had received the trust disclosure Monday morning exactly as scheduled. By Monday afternoon, Brandon had requested an emergency meeting with Sophia. By Tuesday, she'd moved back into her apartment, the one I'd helped her furnish in graduate school, the one she'd kept just in case. The marriage lasted 6 days total. The annulment papers were filed on Wednesday. Brandon's startup collapsed within 2 weeks, without investor confidence, without funding, without the image of stability he tried to project. The whole thing dissolved like sugar and rain. Margaret Chen called with an update. Patricia stopped calling after the first month. Sophia and I had dinner every Sunday at a little Italian place on the north side, the same restaurant where I'd taken her for birthday celebrations since she was 8 years old. She wore jeans. I wore my Kohl's suit. And we were happy. Because here's what I learned in 23 years on the bench. Justice isn't always loud. It isn't always immediate. But it's always patient. And sometimes the best victories are simply letting arrogant men collapse under the weight of their own hubris while you stand quietly in your $42 suit, knowing exactly who you are. So, here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it this way? Should I have told Brandon who I was from the beginning, or did he need to learn this lesson the hard way? Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done in my position? If you enjoyed this story of patience, justice, and a father's love, hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Because trust me, there are more stories where this came from. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones. See you in the next one.